Hey everyone, my name is Muah. I'm the Vice President for Student Development here at Biola University in La Mirada, California, and I'm thrilled to be able to share with you a little bit tonight. So a little bit about myself. I grew up in the Midwest, but I've been living out in California now for about a year, and I moved here a year ago with my daughter Harper and my wife Joy, and we have loved our time out here. It's been great. My career has always been in student development, and I love the work that I get to do. So when I saw that the topic for this year's conference was the joy of leadership, I got really excited because it has been a joy to do this work, and especially as I've leaned into the role that leadership plays in doing student development work, I've really enjoyed that. So I acknowledge leadership is hard, it's challenging, there's occasional lonely moments that I've certainly experienced. And it's been confusing at times, but there's been one element that I just continually come back to, and that is just how enjoyable it can be to lead others. For me, I really find that there's just this sweet and abiding joy that I get to be able to participate in the formation of students as they figure out what the Lord's calling them into. The road to that sense of enjoyment, though, has certainly taken some twists and turns. So I want to share a little bit about that. And in particular, I want to start with a season that was really challenging for me, that has helped give me some language and some values that I've held on to as I've grown in my leadership. So I want to take you back to my junior year of college. I like to say I was best friends with the word yes. I was just living into my time. I went to a smaller Christian college, and I loved my experience there. And so junior year, I was taking a full credit load, and that was a lot, it's a lot to balance that, especially when I also had said yes that year to being an RA in a residence hall full of about 100 and some odd guys. Loved that experience as I balanced full credit load, being an RA. And then on top of that, I added in being a student worker in our admissions office. And if that wasn't enough during the winter months, the January, February, March months in Michigan, I was also a snow crew worker. So from 2 to 5 a.m., I was out shoveling snow. Oh, and I was doing that at the same time that I was doing an internship at a local church. I was in a dating relationship. And then I picked up towards the end of the spring an off-campus job on Saturday mornings. So if you're exhausted hearing me say that, just imagine being me doing all of that. I had said yes to so many things. And they were all good things. That was the hard part. But I had this moment where it all kind of culminated. The result was that I was burnt out. I was finding myself not getting enjoyment from any of those things. Found myself falling asleep in class, which was something that I generally didn't tend to do. I was pulling C's in courses where I normally got A's. And I actually was asked to leave my first ever class that year because I'd shown up late. I was coming late from a prior obligation. I had something else that I was focused on while I was in class. Still think I was unfairly targeted because of who I sat next to. There's a lesson in there for us with who we sit next to in class. But ultimately, I wasn't myself. And I wasn't the only person who noticed this. I actually had a professor who I knew pretty well, who pulled me aside, started from a place of concern just to say like, hey, how are you doing? And then when he found out, there's nothing major that I was struggling with under the surface, he kind of pivoted to some tough love that I really needed. He shared something with me that day that has not left my brain since the day that he shared that. And he said this sentence that just continues to persist. He said, learn to say no to good things so you can say yes to the right things. Learn to say no to good things so you can learn to say yes to the right things. So with that new Hallmark card saying in my back pocket, I went forward from that day, and I never again struggled with being overburdened or saying yes to too many things. Obviously, I'm kidding. But it did lead me down a journey over the last almost 20 years now of thinking more carefully about what I need to be prepared to do in answering the questions that often come up for all of us. Like, what do I say no to? How do I know what the right thing is for me to do? What if that right thing changes? How will I know if it's changing? So I think as I'm thinking about the seat you sit in as a student leader tasked with caring and supporting your peers, I think there's a lesson in here that if I could go back in time and share with younger me who was just figuring out this whole leadership thing, There's two questions that I want to leave us with today. So I want to lead us through just a little bit about that. And the first question that I really had to answer, I started answering in that season, was who am I? In other words, that question is, who am I is asking, how am I uniquely wired to operate? And this looks different for everybody. So this is why it's important that you start with this question, because you can't look at another leader and say, who are they? Okay, that's what it means to be a leader. You have to look inside yourself and say, who am I? How am I uniquely wired to operate? And lead out of that. So for me, that meant acknowledging I'm an introvert. I love being rejuvenated by time by myself, away from others. I'm an Enneagram 6. There's a lot that I still don't know about the Enneagram, but it has been helpful to really understand what that does in terms of just how I embrace what it means to be healthy or not healthy. I'm empathetic, responsible, adaptable. I have command and developer, or so Strengths Finder tells me. And as I spent more time in that assessment, learning about myself, that also helped me understand that, that empathy part means that I can sit with people and live their stories with them, but that it maybe holds some extra weight for me than some other leaders that I admired and tried to emulate early on. I'm pretty good at galvanizing others. I'm pretty good at getting people on board and then really helping to work with people and labor towards a goal together. I also love the wilderness. I love solitude. I grew up backpacking and canoeing and camping. I love hiking, especially all the mountains that I get to hike now. But that was something that I had to actually realize that says something about who I am and how I'm uniquely wired to operate, that I can thrive in that solitude. And even though I love solitude, and even though it's healthy for me, I had to learn that I am uniquely wired to love that connection that comes in community. Hospitality is a deep part of who I am. So once I know myself more, I'm able to actually tend to those elements of myself, nurture them a little bit so that I can thrive in ways that I couldn't do it otherwise. A book that was really powerful for me is Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer. And he has a quote from this book that just has really resonated with me. And the quote is, "Self-care is never a selfish act. It is simply good stewardship of the only gift that I have, the gift I was put on earth to offer to others." Anytime we can listen to our true self and give it the care that it requires, we do it not only for ourselves, but for the many others whose lives we touch. And what I think Parker Palmer is really keyed in on here is that sense that who we are, it matters deeply that we tend that, because it is something that we only get one of. We are only able to care for others really well when we have cared for ourselves first. It's that idea of being a starving baker that we often see in the Habitudes. That sense that we're so busy feeding others that if we don't feed ourselves, eventually we can't feed others either. So some things, I think, as you're thinking about, okay, who am I? How am I uniquely wired to operate? Some things are so intrinsically tied to aspects of your identity that they become obvious yeses to say yes to. For me, that's looking at, how do I help others get involved and motivated? I want others to feel like they see themselves in the story that we're writing together as an institution, in the work that we're doing together. For me, that's a huge sense of belonging. I grew up homeschooled, which I enjoyed that so much, but it meant that I always kind of struggled in college with trying to figure out, what does it look like to actually belong in a community, especially an academic community. And another part of my identity that I've just learned I need to be so mindful of is that I need to have rhythms that honor a calm and measured approach. I've worked in some work settings where it's quick, it's fast paced, there's crisis happening in front of you and you have to respond to it. And I can do that for a bit, but I'm not wired to do that, 8 hours a day, every single day of the week. So we have to know ourselves. And when we know ourselves, those things that are so tied to my sense of identity become quick to say yes to. Some things are also really antithetical to my identity. So I've become better at being able to say no. Like, if I have an opportunity to work for something, but that work ultimately is focused on profits, either equal to or greater than the people, that's a pretty quick no for me. There's nothing wrong with profits, and every organization needs to make at least minimum profits to be able to break even. But I'm not here to make profits. I'm here for people. That's something that I know gets me out of bed in the morning. If I have to do a lot of solo work with no to little interaction with others, I also start to feel that. I can do it for a season, but it doesn't energize me or get me going the way that I want to. And then if there are demands on my time that are more more than just the majority of my waking hours. If I'm spending 10, 12 hours a day focused on work, and that's just the minimum expectation, that's kind of a non-starter for me. I've learned that my life is too important outside of work to dedicate to a job or calling that is going to ask more of me than that. So I think what I'm saying is, as we think about this first question, the first of the two questions, when you know yourself, you know better what to say yes to and what to say no to, because your sense of true self, will ultimately hold you accountable for both those choices. And that's what was happening for me my junior year in college. Is my sense of true self was holding me accountable for saying, hey, you are not living out of who you are uniquely wired to be. So the second question that I want to talk about is then, once you know more about who you are and what you're uniquely wired to do, what are you called to do? What is the work that you're being called into? I like to talk about how we are partnering with God in his redemptive work in the world, and all of us have a unique opportunity to do that. So in 2012, I was a young professional, and I was actually given a really cool opportunity to do something that had checked or would check a lot of the boxes that up to that point in my life were really valuable to me. They checked the box of adventure, it checked the box of responsibility. It was this increased sense of, just what would be entrusted to me was pretty significant. It certainly had a lot of lucrative money tied into it, so I could have made some good money. And there was also this unique sense of pride that I would get from having this particular job. I was really tempted to take that offer, and I thought about it for a while, but there were a number of things that held me back. Some of it was working conditions, like we've already talked about, way more than just 8 hours a day. It also changed who I would be working around, the type of person that I would spend the majority of my time with. But I also had to really struggle with the sense of, is this what I feel called to do? I didn't feel that sense that this was what the Lord had been preparing me for. But how? I think that's the question that you might be asking, and that I think is the right question to ask is, how do I know what I actually feel called to do? Because sometimes opportunities present themselves and we don't see them coming, like this one. So how do I then step back, and how do I discern through that noise, right? That noise of the money, the adventure, the prestige, the uniqueness of this opportunity, to really make what felt like the right decision. So I'll share a couple things that I leaned on that I think I would encourage you to do as well. And the first one was mentors. I went to mentors, people who were older, wiser, a little further down the road than me. And I asked them, hey, you know me well. What do you think? What should I do? I have this option, I have this option. What are some of the thoughts that you have about how I might approach that? Those mentors asked me really hard questions, and something that I really appreciated is they didn't project their own experiences onto me. They didn't say, hey, you know what, I always have regrets about how I handled my early 20s, so here's something that I would have done, so here's what I think you should do. They asked good questions and tried to help me discern, okay, who am I uniquely called to be, and what am I called to do? I also learned to trust my trajectory a little bit. So this opportunity in 2012 was a great opportunity, but it kind of came at me maybe a little bit from like the right? Like where it just like came out of nowhere and was like, oh, this thing's coming at me from the side. But this other opportunity that I also had available to me, it was a continuation of a long and steady path that I had been on. And so learning to say, okay, what is the value of the trajectory I've been on, and how am I building towards faithfulness and not chasing the shiny thing that just kind of popped up out of nowhere. I also had to learn a little bit more about my gut instinct. I think the Lord gives all of us the Holy Spirit to help us navigate life, and that's a part to play. And he also wires into us just that sense of what we know in our inner core, our inner being, that true self, and whether or not it's right for us. And so I had to listen to the Spirit. I had to trust my instincts. My instincts were saying, hey, maybe pump the brakes on this unique, cool, random opportunity that came out of nowhere. I also learned that there's some really good value in asking yourself a really important question in trying to discern, what do I feel called to do? Which of these two options or more options do I want to chase down? And that question is, what will bring me the most joy? Joy erupts when you're operating out of your true sense of self. You cannot help but have this abiding sense of joy when you're living out of who you're called to be. And I think sometimes we as Christians struggle with a little bit of a sense of, if I'm enjoying something too much, then maybe I'm not actually serving the Lord. we like to confuse a sense of martyrdom, that there's a drudgery or a pain associated with a particular path, and that equals God's best for us. And I think the Lord is saying, hey, sometimes, the road is hard. I've certainly walked through journeys that have been really challenging. And at the same time, he also has given me an immense amount of joy out of some of the harder things, the right things that I've pursued as well. And I think we need to pay attention to that. And then finally, I learned that do I have to ask myself, is it good work? Is the work that I'm choosing to pursue, does it add value to the world? Does it help redeem culture? If it's yes, if the answer to that is yes, then sometimes I think we can maybe just say yes to it and trust that it's a good calling, even if we don't have this overwhelming sense that this is the right calling. Because I think we can put too much pressure on wanting to have that step of faith rewarded with certainty before we've taken that step of faith. But if there's good work to be done and there's an opportunity for you to step into it, sometimes that's just simply your chance to practice that step of faith and say, I'm going to dedicate myself to it and trust that the sense of clarity will follow. I also, in that sense, I think I had to lower the threshold, the pressure that I was putting myself on to find the right decision, and instead just say, a decision is better than no decision here. So this mindset has really led me well, if a little bit haphazardly at times, as to how I maybe would have ideally designed my career journey. But now I'm sitting here, I'm the vice president at Biola, and I've had a professional career that honestly I never would have imagined. When I think back to that day in 2012 where I made the phone call and said, I'm not going to take this other position, this other opportunity, I never would have guessed that I'd be sitting here in this office today with my story being what it is. Asking those two questions of who am I and what am I being called to do, it's led to some challenging emotions, some challenging experiences, and I have shifted career focuses. I have taken on new opportunities that I never would have expected. I think it's really important that we ask ourselves those hard questions, and the sooner we ask those questions and commit to really figuring out who am I, how am I uniquely wired to operate, and what is the opportunity that's ahead of me to really participate in God's redemptive work in the world, the sooner we have the opportunity to really avoid reality asking those same questions of us when we maybe have chased down some dead ends or dedicated some time and effort towards things that maybe are a little bit more fleeting. So I'm out here living in California now. I think I am a little bit better at saying no. I still struggle, as most of us would. It is hard, I love saying yes to things. But when I think about my life right now, I have so much more joy in my life for learning to say better no's. I certainly miss some of my hobbies from time to time. As I went through my master's program, fantasy football fell to the wayside and I haven't gone back to it. When I started my doctorate, playing broom ball with the guys every couple of weeks, that was something that I gave up, and I do miss those things. I also occasionally have FOMO, and I think we all are wired to avoid FOMO on some level, that fear of missing out. I'll jump on Instagram and I'll see what my friends are up to on vacation or things that they're participating in their daily lives. I'll jump on LinkedIn and I'll see people who are apparently their career is just taken off and they are making moves that I envy at times. Sometimes when you learn to say better no's, when you learn to say no better, you build your resume a little slower. You don't have as many things to put on the Instagram. You don't have as many opportunities to feel like you're gaining or grabbing onto something that a lot of your peers are. That's okay. For me, I have learned that there's a beauty in being able to say no, so that I can, instead of having 6 things that I've committed to, have the 1 or 2 that just really bring me that most joy, that make me feel like it's operating out of who I am and what I'm called to do. No, that's some seasons it's really hard to do that. There was a season in the last few years where I was finishing my doctorate. Work was pretty crazy. I had a young daughter. I had a relationship with my wife that I was still nurturing. I had friends. We had this whole pandemic thing happening, right? Like that was a season where I didn't have a lot of capacity, and yet I also didn't have the permission from life, just in general, to say no as readily. So sometimes you just have to be okay with recognizing this season will require me to say yes more than I ideally would like. Just learning when you can control those things and being okay with the hard no is a really good rhythm to start practicing. So I just want to leave you with this encouragement. The work that you do as a student leader is such good work. My own leadership experience, I was on our youth group leadership council. I led worship. I was an RA. I was a first year experience leader. I was a small group leader. I was a student employee in multiple campus departments on my campus. I spent some time as an intern in a local youth group. The work that I did and the work that you do every single day, it is so good and it is so valuable. And also, you can't be everything everywhere all at once. That's just impossible. So I'd like to just encourage you with this as we wrap up. When you try to be everything for everyone, everywhere, all at once, or when you fail to step back to let someone else jump in and say yes to something that you've said no to, or when you just simply fail to rest and honor that sense of self-care that Parker Palmer reminds us is our one true gift to give to the world, we sometimes suggest in our actions when we do those things that the sufficiency of God isn't enough, that he can't do his redemptive work without me, Mark Muah, particularly involved in it. And oftentimes we prevent others from bleeding out of their gifts and from the way that they are uniquely called to participate in that work with us. And I think, when we think about that sense of true self, that sense of caring for it's the imago Dei in us. We see a God who spent 6 days creating, and then on the seventh he rested. And he commands us in the 10 Commandments to honor the Sabbath. It's not a recommendation, it's not a best practice, it's a expectation for us as believers that we step aside, that we rest, that we say no to the producing that we're called to do in our everyday lives. We say no to the doing and the performing and the showing up, and we simply sit and receive what God has to give us on that day. And I think that's a really good reminder for me as I go into another busy year, just trying to think, how do I let the Lord show up for me when I pause and learn to say no, good no's to things that will add value, but ultimately they're not right for me to do. So joy in leadership, it's something that we all have the opportunity to enjoy, to have, and yet it can be really hard to attain, especially when we're learning the risks of saying yes to too many things. So I would suggest that joy is the result of knowing yourself well and then leading out of that truth in the work that we're called to do. And that's my encouragement to you today. So I hope that you are able to learn who you are, how you're uniquely wired to operate, and learn what you're being called into to do that's unique and redemptive in the world, so that you too can find the joy in leadership that I have really come to enjoy and appreciate for myself.